Alright, so now what we need to do is go ahead and build our register route and then implement a registration form. Now, going back to our folder structure, remember our Angular 2 application is inside of client, source, app, and then here are our components. So what we need to do is navigate to that location in our terminal into the components folder and type in ng-generate component, and then I'll name it register. And that will generate the files for us. And so you'll see the new component here, and I'm just going to open up the HTML and just replace this with a header. And then so back to our routing configuration file here, app routing module. I just need to add that here. So first I'm going to import it. And I'm going to add this path right below dashboard. And the path will just be register. And of course the component is going to be the new one we just created. So now what I want to do is just test this out and make sure it works. So I'm just going to go ahead and click, type it in up here, register, and here's our register page. Okay. So now I want to actually go back to the home, and we can add it to this link here now that we have a working component. So we can go to the home and do that first inside the HTML. I believe it's right here. Replace this with router link. Okay, and you can test that. Just click that register button, should take you to the register page. Now I also want to add it to the navigation. And then I'll just go to my nav bar component and then do the same right here. And actually I'm just going to copy the same thing from up here. And then I'm going to go ahead and test that one. Alright, and there we go. So now we just go ahead and start adding our form. Now Angular 2 has two types of forms. It has reactive forms and template forms. And basically the difference is, going back to my code editor here, I'll actually just go into the register. Now templated ones, they basically just work directly in the HTML page. They're really simple and really fast to set up. The easiest configuration, but the problem with that is your validation is very limited, and the customization is very limited for those. But if you don't really want to do much with your forms, I would recommend that style. And so the reactive forms are created in the component.ts file. So basically in your class here, and it's all done back here, and then you're basically importing all the data from the HTML. It's a little bit more complicated to use. Actually, it's not really all that complicated, but it's a little bit more work. But I recommend this method because it gives you the most flexibility and the most customization. But it really just depends on your situation. And I'm just going to show you how to use reactive forms because templated forms are really easy to set up. So I'm not going to waste any time showing you that. But instead, we're going to go straight to the reactive forms. And so before we implement that, I'm just going to build out the form, the HTML form here using Bootstrap. And so then what I'm going to do, just to save time, I'm actually going to paste a form in here, but it's a pretty basic form. I have an input for each field, nothing fancy here. I have all of them inside of a div. But all this code will be in the description of this file if you just want to copy it. And this is what the form looks like, pretty basic form. So now what we need to do is create the actual form in the component.ts file. Now if you go back over to the reactive forms page, the Angular documentation, they pretty much tell you everything that you'll need to set up the forms. And so the first thing that we need to do is import the form module. So let me search for it here. This is actually not the one that we need. So this one right here, form builder, form group. So I'm just going to copy that and then paste it in my register component.ts. And I'm also going to add an additional thing, validators. And if you keep searching here, you'll actually find it, but they have everything broken up into different sections. And so just to save time, I'm just going to put it all together. So what we need to do is inside of a constructor, in order to use the form builder, we actually have to add that in here. So the way you do that is you can just type in private and whatever you want to name it. So I'm just going to name it form builder, followed by a colon, and then the actual name from up here, which is the same thing, just title case or camel case. So now we can actually use that inside of the class. So we want to export the form, and the way we do that is we just first we can name it whatever we want. I'm just going to name it form, and then we give it the form group type. Okay, so that basically what we're doing here is just exporting a form of the form group type, and that allows us to access it here. And so the way that you add that is just right here in the form tag. You just add form group equals and then the name of the form, which is minus form. So again, all of this is on this page, but just to save time, because I don't want to flip back and forth, I'm just going to type it from memory. And but if you want to read more about it, then feel free to go to that page. So probably the easiest way to do this is just to create a function that creates the form for you. So I'll just name it create form. And so what we do is we assign this new form to this type that we created up here. So we'll do that with this.form equals, and then this.form builder, okay, which is what we added here to the constructor, dot group, and then pass in an object. And so this is where we'll define all the fields of our group. Okay, so if you recall, we have username, email, password, and confirm password. All right, so first we'll start off with email. And so what this does right here is just passes in a default, and by default we want it blank. If you wanted to put something here like say, then the form would start off with this field in there. But it's basically like value inside of input. You know how you can add value to this, the value attribute. That's basically what that is. Okay. And we'll just add comma. We'll do username, same thing, password, and then confirm. Now in order to use these, what we need to do is go back into the HTML and add a new attribute here. And I'm just going to do it at the end here. And it's actually going to be called form control name. And then that has to match two things. One, it has to match the name attribute. And then it also has to match this. So we'll have email, or we'll have username, and then right here also username. Okay, so the three will match. And so we'll just do the same thing for these. Okay, now back over in the register component.ts, this form isn't created, so basically we need to invoke this this function. And the way we can do that is inside of the constructor, inside these brackets here. We can basically specify whatever we want to be initiated or created once this component is constructed. Basically, as soon as the component is loaded, this becomes part of the HTML and the component, right? So we'll just say this.create form. So anytime this component loads now, it will automatically invoke this, creating the form which makes it available to the HTML. Okay, so then something else that we need to do is, if you go into the app.module, you'll notice that Angular comes with the forms module. Since we're using reactive forms, we actually have to replace that and remove it from here. So we'll just go down to the bottom, remove this module, and remove this one. And then back on the Angular website, we'll just click Import Reactive Forms module, grab this, and then paste it here. And we also have to add that down here. Now, once you hit save on everything, you won't really notice anything different. So let's try something. What I'll do is in the register page at the very bottom, I'm just going to add a paragraph here. Just to kind of show you how this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this the two brackets here and type in form controls dot username dot value, and then I'll do the same down here. Whoops. So now you'll notice the three fields at the bottom, and anytime I type anything here, it automatically populates at the bottom. Okay, so now we have data binding, and so what we can do is send this to the back end. Okay, so we just need to add some functionality to it. I'm going to comment this out for right now. So inside of component.ts, I'm actually going to create a function right here. And actually, I like to keep the constructor at the top, just because I constantly add things there. But below this, I'm going to create a function called onRegisterSubmit, and this is going to be our registration submission. And so for right now, I'm just going to log something to the console, and I'm going to log this form to see what happens. So then I'm going to add an event to this, and Angular 2 events are just enclosed in parentheses, followed by the name of the event. This one's going to be submit, and then I'm going to run the function that we just created. Alright, so then I'm just going to enter some data here and then press submit, and then you'll see there it logs the entire form group object. Okay, so next I want to show you how this validators works. It's really easy to implement. Actually, let me fix this all up really quick. So what you do is instead of having the empty quotations here, you enter it into an array. And then after the quotations, you type in comma, and then the name of the validator. Okay, so validator required. Okay, now back on the Angular page here, if you search validators, there's a bunch of them. You can also create your own, but I'm just going to show you how that one works really quick. Okay, so now what we can do is we can actually take this error and apply it in the form. So down here where the email is, right beneath the input, I'm going to add a list, and I'm going to make it of the class help block. Then I'm going to say this field is required. Now, right off the bat, it's going to display it at all times, and we don't want that. So we need to specify criteria. Now, before I do that, what I want to do is use some Angular Bootstrap here. So in this div up here, I'm going to add ng class. And I'm going to have two main fields. I'm going to have has success. Well, let me start off with has error, followed by has success. So what I want to do is I'm going to apply a condition here. Anytime this condition is met, then it will invoke the has error class from Bootstrap. And so what I want is to display it if form.controls.email and this is just like we used below, and then .errors. So if errors are true on this email field, then we'll display the has error class. Now the problem with this is once the page loads, it'll automatically have an error because it's going to be empty by default. And remember, we added that required validator. So what we need to do is make sure that the user has had a chance to edit the form too. So we can add and form.controls.email dirty. And what that means is the user has actually clicked or typed, has actually typed something in the form. Okay. And then for errors, it's pretty simple. We just say if form.controls.email.errors is not true. Okay, and so this is what that looks like. You'll notice nothing is highlighted here, and as soon as I type in something, it automatically highlights green. That's the has success class. And then once I delete it, it turns red. So now we just need to make sure this doesn't show when the page first loads. So we just need to add something here. So for this list element here, I'm just going to add an NGIf statement. All right, and so this is how you add all the NG codes in Angular. You just use a little star here, and you specify what you want. So I'll say show this field if form.controls.email.errors is true. And I don't want to display for all types of errors, right? Even though right now we only have validation, required, but we're going to add more, and we don't want to show this for every single one of the errors. So we just want to show it for .required errors. Now, one other thing that I want to add is right before the period, I want to add a question mark, right? Because if this error doesn't exist, what's going to happen is Angular is going to throw you an error because it's basically going to be undefined. So we add this question mark as to say if such a thing exists, right? If it's defined. If it's not defined, then don't even worry about this, okay? So you always want to add that when you're working with errors in Angular too. And same thing as above, we want to make sure the user has had a chance to actually edit the form, so we'll just add and. So let's go ahead and test that out. You'll notice it's not showing now by default, and then if I type something and then delete it, you should get the red box and then the error message here. Okay, and once you type something in again, it should go away. So what I want to do really quick is I want to add that to all of these fields because of course they're all required. I'm going back over to my HTML. I'm pretty much just going to copy this whole thing. And then I'm just going to change this from email to username. Okay, then I'm just going to test everything, make sure that I copied and pasted everything correctly. Okay, so we're good to go. Okay, so I'm going to add something to this. Instead of logging the form, I'm just going to say form submitted. Right, so now when we hit that button, you'll see the message log here on the side. Now, what I want to prevent is this form to be submitted if it's not valid. So the way we can do that is we can add here in the input, inside of the square brackets, we can add disabled. And we can say if form valid is not true. And so now you'll notice that it's grayed out and you can't submit it. And you shouldn't be able to click inside and hit enter either until all these fields are filled out. Okay. So now I actually want to add more validation to this. I'm just going to delete this at the bottom. Don't need that anymore. But we want to add additional validators to this, right? For example, we want to make sure that the user enters a correct type of email, a strong password, and that the confirm field matches the password field, right? So to enter more validators, what you want to do is actually just type in validators.compose, and then add the array there, and that lets you put in multiple just separated by comma. And so another built-in one is min length and max length. And so all you do is just pass in parentheses, and then inside the parentheses you just type in what number you want as the minimum and the maximum. Now what I like to do is match the user model that we created. So if you go back, you notice that for the email field, what did I say? I said 5 and 30. So I'm just going to use those same values. Say 5 minimum and then 30 maximum. And so I'm actually going to do the same thing for all of these. Okay, so now we can go ahead and add that to our HTML. I'm just going to work my way up from username. So I'm going to add another list here, and this one's going to say minimum characters. What did I say? 3 and 15. Okay, so 3, maximum 15. And NGIf is going to be form controls, username errors. Now instead of required, this one is just going to be min length. And then I'm going to add or and copy the same thing, but I'm going to change this to max length. So what that does is it displays this message if either min length is not obeyed or max length. Okay. So let me just go ahead and test that. And then once you exceed the characters, you should get that error back. Okay. So let's go ahead and add that to the rest of the fields. Actually, I'm just going to copy this. Now, if you remember back in our user model, we had 2 validations. We had the length checkers, and then we also had the regular expressions. We can use those exact same ones in Angular. So I'm going to start off with the email. And so I'm actually just going to create a function down here. So I'm going to name this function validate email. Now you want to pass in to the function controls, and that's just part of the form group, and it allows us to play with that field and manipulate it. So I'm going to paste that in there, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to test it, and you just want to add controls.value. Okay, and so this is going to spit out whatever the email field is. Okay, and so what I'll do with this is I'll say if it's true, meaning it passes the test, then we'll return null for error. Else we're going to return an error, and I'm just going to name this error validate email, the same as the name of the function, just to keep it simple, and then I'll make it true. And so then up here, in order to add a function for the validation, you just type in this .validate email. And so this is what it's going to look like at the HTML side of things. I'm going to create another list, and I'm just about this must be valid email. Oh, and actually I just realized up here I forgot to add the form controls dirty. I want to make sure that they have not edited it yet. So let me just do that really quick. Okay, and then so for this one, I'm gonna add NGIf. This one's gonna be form controls email .errors, and then the name that we passed in. And remember, so if it's an error, we're returning it as true. If you go back to the function. And so we just use that same name in the HTML, okay? And then same thing, I'm also going to add form controls.email.dirty. So let me just go ahead and test everything. And that should disappear when you type in a valid email. And then as soon as you type in something that makes it a not valid email, you'll get that there. Okay, so now we just want to go ahead and do that for all the other fields. Should go a little faster now. So I'm going to go ahead and create another function. This one's going to be, let's see what's next, username. So we'll say validate username. And then add it right here. And go back to HTML. And then, let's see, add that here. And then, and actually, I can just copy the same message. Username does not have any special characters. I'll just use the same one. Right, I'm just going to go ahead and test that really quick. Then type in something that you know will make it an invalid username. There you go. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, and we'll do password. And then back over to my HTML. Let's go ahead and test that really quick. Right, then I'm going to put an actual password that I know will work. Okay, there we go. Now you might be thinking, okay, why are we doing this twice if we did all this validation here? You always want to do double validation, front end and back end. The reason for it is kind of like just double security, right? If somehow users get past this validation, either by disabling JavaScript or something like that, what happens is none of this will apply, and then they can just send data to the backend. And so then in the backend, we're just catching it with this extra validation. But it also saves you some work if you implement it here on the front end, even though it seems like double work at first. But what you do is you avoid sending any, dirty data to the back end. You just kind of clean up the data. It just helps you, ensure what you're sending to the back end is ready to go, rather than, sending a request to the server multiple times and the data's not even ready. So why even burden the server with data that's not yet ready? So that's why we implement it on the front end here. Okay, so now we just need to add the validation to the confirm field. And the easiest way to do this is, instead of adding it to the different fields, you can add it to the overall entire form. That way you can grab as many fields as you want. And so the way you do this is at the end of this last bracket here, or the one before the parentheses. You want to type in a comma and then an object, and then validator. And this is where we're going to put the name of our function. So I'm going to name it matching passwords. And into it, I'm going to pass two fields. I'm going to pass the password field and then obviously the confirm field, right? So these two. All right. So let's go ahead and create that function. All right, so for this, it's going to be a little different. So we're going to return a group, a form group. And then we're just going to compare the values, and that's pretty easy to do. You just say group.controls. And then the field, so password, and then its value. and then you just do the exact same thing. So then we're just comparing values to see if they're equal. If they are, we'll return null for error. And then of course if they're not, we'll return an error. We'll name it matching passwords. Oh, whoops, forgot, no period there. So yeah, that's all you really need to do. So let's go back over to HTML, and we can add a new field to this. So we'll just say passwords do not match. We'll say NGIf form. Now instead of using controls dot and then the field and errors, since we added this validation to the overall form, not a specific field, we'll just add directly errors like that. Whoops, like that. And then the name. And then we'll also specify that the form controls.confirm is dirty. All right, not the form itself, but just this field is dirty. Whoops, misspelled that. Now you'll notice one thing: if it says passwords do not match, it's still highlighted green, and that's because we have to actually add another error class up here. So you want to go up here after this parentheses. In fact, I'm just going to copy that one and just type in or. Instead of this, I'm just going to use errors.matching passwords. And then we also need to add it down here. We'll have to say no form.errors.matching passwords. All right, let's see if that worked. And then I'm going to enter my valid password here. All right, and then if you change something, it should automatically trigger that error there. So you just want to make sure of that. Okay, then I'm just going to end the video here because the next part is going to be a little bit long. And so what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to be submitting this form to the back end using Angular 2's HTTP module. But we're also going to add a few other features. So we'll catch that in the next video.